All right, this is Becky Simmons, RIT archivist, conducting an oral history interview during Brick City Homecoming 2016 with Richard Montena. All right, what years did you attend RIT?
1962 to 1966.
All right. You were on the downtown campus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Were you a full-time student or a part-time
Yes,
evening?
full-time,
Full-time day student.
yeah.
And what was your major?
Retailing, which was in the business school at that point. And I also, and the reason I came here was because there was a design component to it, an interior design component to it,
Right.
because of furnishings marketing.
Right.
And so it was called a specialization at that point. So that's what I went through 4 years and studied and
You specifically
got
studied the
it was
interior.
a Bachelor of Science in retailing. Yep.
And why did you choose RIT?
Well, it was interesting. I really was thinking I was going to go into architecture. I had very bad counseling in high school regarding that, and I didn't know any architects, but I thought I wanted to be an architect, and so I went through the process. I was rejected at RISD. But I was accepted at Pratt in New York, and I was not encouraged to go to New York City. And so when I saw this design specialization in this program here at that time, that's kind of why I came to Rochester.
Mm-hmm.
It was thought to be a safer place and than New York City, and
Where did you live?
Lake George, New York.
Oh, you were in Lake
Is
George.
where I came from, and it was a very sheltered life to that point. And so when I came to RIT, it was the first time I'd been away on my own anywhere, and so there was a lot of growth. I went from being a little hometown nerd to whatever,
Right.
a young adult here at
That's what
at
happened.
RIT. Yeah, it was in that way. It was a really good transition. I went from here to Chicago
Right.
for my first job, which was a bigger transition, but it was a step along the way.
What did you do in Chicago when you went there?
Well, I went to work for Carson Perry Scott.
Right.
And Carson's at that point was big into furniture, home furnishings, I should say, and I was a home furnishings coordinator, is what they called it, which we were supposed to work with the buyers to coordinate the purchasing for the general image of the store, which was around this imports, strong import for home furnishings and the sort of look of the store. I'm putting that word in quotes, which was part of their marketing, to try to find a place between Marshall Fields and Sears. And of course, when you think of it now, Marshall Fields is gone, Carson's is gone. Macy's still exists, but the big department stores it's all changed completely now. But that's what was happening at that time, and because of that, my next job was to manage a Scandinavian store, which they established in Southern Illinois to improve their image there, where they had bought a whole chain of family-owned department stores.
And what was this?
And it was called the Scandinavian Shop.
Oh, really?
And it was a whole. I think we had 3,000 square feet of fine china and glassware and designer sofas and
Danish modern style, which was popular then.
Rosewood and
Yeah.
leather and just gorgeous stuff. And I did get to go to Scandinavia on a buying trip. At that point, I'd already decided to go back to school, back to college, but so they got pretty upset with me when I announced that. But they had in mind that they were going to send me up to, I don't know, someplace in Indiana and have me be a shoe buyer or something. That it wasn't the design stuff that, I mean, the Scandinavian shop experience was wonderful. I mean, the first place I was managing other people.
Right.
Some really interesting political stuff was going on, in terms of hiring. The local community was upset because all of our clerks were, Scandinavian or, white, and, they wanted us to integrate. And so I went through some very interesting things at that point. And it's interesting because our company was actually in the forefront in Chicago of good racial relationships with people, but it all backfired when somebody torched the store in Chicago. That was while I was managing this store. One day we called, as we usually did, to Chicago store, and there were no answers, and it turned out that they had torched 3 floors of the Carson building.
Who would think that a retail establishment would get involved with racial issues? I mean, I know people burned things.
Well, I saw...
But it wasn't usually targeted.
Well,
maybe it was targeted.
Yeah, I think it was targeted, but I'm not sure why. I do remember one day working in the housewares department on a display, and a woman came up to me and said she wanted to buy something. I don't remember what it was, and I said, "Well, I'm not a sales associate, but I'll, And I took her over to a woman who happened to be black, and the woman refused to let her ring up the sale. And I felt so angry. I just wanted to hit her, for being so bigoted,
Do you think Southern Illinois was worse than Chicago?
Well, that was Chicago.
Oh, that was in Chicago.
That was Chicago. Yes, I do agree that Southern Illinois was worse.
Less accepting.
Yeah, it was worse. But anyway, that was just part of kind of growing up in the real world. And,
well, you were in your 20s then, still, right?
Yeah, I mean, there were times when somebody said, "Could I see the manager of the store?" And I would come out, and they'd say, "No, I want to see the manager." And I said, "Well, I am the manager," and I was 22. So
that's pretty good.
So anyway, but
that's young to be.
I was preceded at Carson's by a person from our department who had gone to Carson's a year earlier, and they were very impressed with her, and so they hired a couple more of us that next year, and at that point I also went through the what would you call it? I tried to go into officer candidate school at the end of our IT experience, and because it was likely that I was going to have to go in the Vietnam War. And I wanted to go in the best possible way. I was rejected because I had a back issue.
Right.
And so I went ahead and made plans, get married, and I got a draft notice to appear for a physical the same day that I was getting married. And when I called to tell them that, they said, "Well, you should have told us you were getting married." And from then on, the whole experience with the government and the draft and all of that was very negative. colored my impression for the rest of my life, really. But anyway, so I got married on a Friday night, went back to Chicago, appeared at 6 o'clock in the morning on Monday morning for my physical, and I saw some things going on there with, hippie-looking kids and so forth. It was discrimination in the worst way. The doctors, grabbing people by the genitals, and it was really, really terrible. And but anyway, they decided they were going to draft me anyway, and so I came back east to my local draft board, which was in Albany, and prepared to go in.
Mm-hmm.
And that morning, I asked the guy who was sitting at a desk with a mostly empty file cabinet behind him if they had any letters from doctors. And he said, well, let me check your file. And there were two letters from doctors in there that said I should not go in the service. And so all he would say to me at that point was, well, you're not going in today. I ended up with a 1Y, and I didn't have to go in. But
how did the doctor's letters get there?
Well, I had gone to doctors
and said,
and
I have this
to have them write, and it wasn't a debilitating condition, but it was a curvature. What they would have done they would have fused my spine to make me fodder for the cannons. I mean, the whole thing was just terrible, and I'm sure other people have a lot worse stories than mine.
Yeah.
But anyway, I went through all that, and then I went to Carson's. And the next year, after I was working in the Chicago store,
mm-hmm.
they transferred me down to manage the Scandinavian store. So, that was a pretty wonderful experience. I mean, I got to design model rooms and stuff like that, and then I ended up meeting the people who would get me into a master's program at the University of Illinois.
Right.
And then I decided that industrial design wasn't really what I wanted. So I talked to at that point my wife was working as a secretary in the architecture department. And I interviewed with professors there, and they said, well, why don't you transfer into architecture?
Right.
So I did.
So why did you choose industrial design?
Well, it was a way to get a master's without having an undergraduate degree in the same program.
Okay. You thought you needed
in
an architecture degree to get into the architecture program.
I did.
You did?
As a master's, yeah.
Okay.
So I had to go through the undergraduate program. So I went through the five-year undergraduate professional degree.
Oh, you did another undergraduate degree.
Yeah. Well, but it's considered a professional degree. So it was a 5-year degree, but I got it in 3 years because of transferring credits and stuff. And I got to teach during that time as a graduate assistant. While I was still in industrial design and transitioning through, I was teaching as a graduate assistant. And when I got to be an undergraduate, again in architecture, I had to walk my papers through and get special permission from the dean because I was no longer a graduate student. So it was a very, very interesting, bureaucracy.
I know, I was just about to say bureaucracy.
I mean, in the University of Illinois, there were 1,500 people in the architecture department alone.
Wow.
33,000 on campus.
Yeah, no, it's a big
right?
university.
So it was a big, bureaucratic place. But looking back on it, it was a pretty wonderful experience. But I got to say that my experience here at RIT was, and I'm not just being nostalgic about it, it was really a period of great growth and learning about myself and learning that I didn't learn like other people. I had one negative experience here. I think it was probably in my second year. I had a communications class, a required communications class, which was mostly about logic and communication. And I wasn't doing well on the tests at all. You know, A plus B equals C was easy enough, but when they got into some other stuff about logic and process, brain process, I wasn't doing well at all on the tests. I don't know why, but it just isn't the way my mind was working, and apparently the way I learn. But this teacher was old school, and you know, you just had to think that way. And so we had to do a paper, and it was on the Sacco Vanzetti case. And I was also going through a terrible roommate situation that spring. So I spent most of my time in the library doing this paper. And I got it back, and it was a failing grade, and it was please see me. And she claimed that I had not written the paper, that I couldn't have written the paper because of the performance that I was doing on these quizzes, even though she said it was a very interesting paper and very interesting conclusions. And you know, well, it turns out that I work intuitively and logically. That's the way my mind works, and she just couldn't accept that, and so she raised it to a C. But it was something I should have probably taken to the dean or whatever, but you know, I wasn't that kind of a rambunctious person, so I didn't do it.
These young people still don't do that.
But it was a sour experience.
Yeah, that is sour. But
you know, but it taught me something about my learning, how I learn.
Yeah.
But I didn't know until later
right.
that's what had happened.
Well, right.
You know,
You need a little maturity to look back on that. I don't think. How many of us understand how we're learning at that age?
No, I know. But of course now, in high school they do enough of this cognitive stuff that they realize that people learn in different ways, and they teach in different ways.
Right. No, now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
People are aware of it, and you're supposed to reach all the all the students in the classroom. You know, some visual, some textual. It's
three or four other big things that happened during my tenure here were, let's see, the Kennedy assassination.
Oh yeah.
Before that, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right. The 60s were
and let's see,
time.
there were a couple other things that I was thinking about that had happened in those days. Oh, we had the race riots. There was a
here
helicopter.
in Rochester.
There was a helicopter that crashed right at the end of my street.
Right, and there were issues on the downtown campus, right?
Well, I guess I'd never had
never experienced
anything terrible.
No,
I was in Nathaniel Rochester Hall for the first year, and I was in a room, assigned with a roommate. And we were together, I think, there was a quarter system at that point, and I think we were in the same room for the first 2 quarters, and then we decided to room with 2 other guys for the next quarter, and maybe the summer. I'm not sure how that worked. And the summer, that's the only summer that I went home to work at home, but that 4-man room situation was not a good scene, and I ended up 3 against 1, and so, But interestingly enough, I'm the only one that continued with my education here. The other 3 didn't come back for their sophomore year.
Right.
So anyway, that's some of what I went through at the time. Oh, the other thing was, and this is when I was on work block, I worked at Sibley's for all my work blocks, which was great because, you got to earn money and you got to see the field you thought you were going to be in, and it was great. And I made some good contacts with the buyer. I worked for him, I think, all 4 work blocks. so that was pretty neat. But during that time, we had the blackout. I think that was the fall of '65. We had the big electric blackout problem. And I was working, I was on my way to work, I was on the escalator, and it started to pulse. It was the strangest experience. And the lights were going kind of on and off in the whole store. And then it went completely dark, and I got to the office where there were outside windows, and at that point it hadn't gone completely dark outside. And somebody thrust a flashlight in my hand and said, "You got to guide people out of here." So I was helping people down the stairs. They were still trying to buy things. Here we were in pitch blackness, and
they wanted to get their sales done.
And they still wanted to buy, plastic flowers or something. It was just really weird. But anyway, we got them out of the store, and then all the store employees were huddled kind of on the first floor, and we didn't know whether we were under attack. We didn't know what was happening. Yeah. And then I had driven to work, and 2 other people were riding with me, and they were working in another store, and so somehow we found each other at the car. There were no traffic lights or anything, so we had to make our way back to campus.
Right.
But we made it, and one of them was a girl that I was dating at the time, and she came back to the apartment, but she wanted to go back to the dorm to get something, and they wouldn't let her out. After they locked them all in because nobody knew what was going on. And so this was about 8 o'clock at night at that point, and then we had, I don't know, I think the power came back on
pretty quickly?
It was not too bad. It was like 10 or 11 o'clock that night it came back on.
I was too young to remember this, I guess. Maybe I was already in bed.
It was pretty amazing. I mean, it was all the way through New York State.
Right, I was in Schenectady.
The problem happened in I think Buffalo or
was it?
out there where it sort of started. And the whole Northeast was dark, and it was pretty scary. And of course, people didn't know why or what was happening, and with all this stuff going on with the Cold War and everything.
And the Cubans,
So it was certainly an interesting time. So that was
unsettling times.
Yeah. And, it's not too dissimilar from the feelings we're having today about security and everything.
Yeah.
What goes around comes around. It's really interesting.
History repeats itself.
Yeah.
Somehow.
So let's see.
You talked about your major.
Yeah, I wasn't a very social person. Haven't been my whole life, actually. I haven't been much of a joiner. One of the things that I did do, which was a wonderful experience, was that I joined the chapel choir, which was all Eastman School people, pretty much. And when I heard them, I thought, I can never do this. But I was accepted in the group, and got to meet Howard Hansen, who was he was the founder of the school and stayed with it for 40 years or something like that as dean. And the people were they were wonderful. They were kind of wild. Some of them were students, like the paid soloists were students. It was also an interesting situation with race relationships, because that church was a very mixed congregation.
Is this the church that was on RIT's campus?
It's the one. It's
the
First Presbyterian.
Right.
Yeah, right there on the corner. It still exists.
Right.
It's kind of in an island of its own. Right. I don't know how it's surviving, but anyway. But the minister was a Unitarian.
Interesting.
And it was because of that experience that I realized I was atheist. So it's an interesting situation to go through what is considered a religious experience, but to realize that
You're
that
singing
isn't what
psalms. Well, you know.
yeah, but it was interesting, because all of his messages were.
Well, Unitarians are.
It was more, yeah. It was much more. What's the right word? Well, I can't think of the right word, but anyway, that's. It was good, but I didn't stay in the chorus after that. I didn't feel right about it after that. But after I came to that realization. But while I was there, it was really quite wonderful. I was also in an RPI chorus, and
What's an RPI course?
well, I don't know. It was a mixed chorus.
Okay.
It was
An RIT.
RIT club, I guess.
Okay.
Probably. I don't remember what
You said
we were
RPI.
called.
I thought maybe.
I
thought that meant.
The reason I said RPI and I mixed that up is because I ended
Oh, right, you worked
I ended
at
up
RPI.
working at RPI
Right.
for the last 25
Right, so it's-
years of
right.
my life before retirement. So
Yeah. Oh, so there was an RIT course. Oh, good.
yeah, there was an RIT course, and I was in that, and also I think a barbershop group too
Uh-huh,
that
like
I was
an
in
8-beat
for
measure of
a
the
little
old
bit.
days, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember my throat size went up a little bit from that experience
Oh, you
because I was
developed.
using my voice so much.
Huh.
Yeah.
Did you continue to sing after RIT?
Not regularly until
No.
quite a bit later. I had a cousin I was very close to. Actually, he brought me out here to see our RPI, RIT. I did it again before I came here. He's a wonderful musician, and when I got back to Albany, he actually paid me to sing in his choir for a while.
Oh, great.
Which I did again until I felt like a terrible hypocrite and I quit. But yeah. Anyway, I mean, I still enjoy singing religious music and stuff.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It's beautiful music, but
yeah, there's a certain border there that I don't like.
you
to
don't cross over.
Yeah.
So you lived in the dorm for the most part.
No, I lived in the dorm just the first year.
And then you went off campus.
Yeah. The first apartment was on Atkinson Street, right next to a fraternity, which, they were always raising heck and causing problems.
Right.
But it was also in kind of considered the ghetto area. And so, there was, but we never got bothered by those folks. I don't know, they saw us coming and going, and they, we would holler back and forth. It was never a life-threatening. It didn't ever feel life-threatening or anything over there. But I moved from there over behind Sears, over behind, I don't know where, it's probably not there anymore.
It was on
But
Monroe Avenue.
Clinton, Monroe Avenue area.
Yeah.
Which was actually probably not a better thing to do, but when we went through the riots, and there were curfews, I remember my roommate Gordon, who was here with me today, his folks called and said, you got to get out of the city. And so we broke curfew really and drove down to Canandaigua, actually Shortsville, but anyway, that's the area. And I remember my car was on fumes, but we felt like we needed to get out of the city because of that area. And remember in the store we had to take all knives or anything that could be thought of as a weapon off the shelves.
What time of year? I think this was in the summer.
It was.
The riots were.
It was, well, it was definitely warm weather, but I don't remember whether it was spring, summer, or fall.
But you were in school for sure.
Well, I was on work block. I think I was on work block. But it was kind of scary because one of Gordon's former roommates had stayed at that apartment house, or at that place that had apartments in it, next to the fraternity on Atkinson Street, and his mother was worried about him, and he was always out there drinking and partying with people, and I think he had been up to the lake in some sort of a festival or something that was going on up there. Anyway, she asked if we could check on him because she hadn't heard from him, and so I drove, back from Monroe Avenue, and as I came around Plymouth Avenue, the National Guard was getting out of buses along there, and then I drove into the neighborhood, and I saw him asleep or whatever on the couch, but I couldn't wake him. I didn't break in, but so I could tell he was breathing, and so went back, and I don't know what we told his mother, something that we would have him call, somehow, I don't know what kind of an excuse we made up, but anyway. But the fact that the National Guard was getting out of the buses there, on a Sunday morning, in busloads of them, to patrol the city was pretty nerve-wracking. Later on, at the University of Illinois, the Vietnam War was still going on, and there were strikes all the time.
Yeah.
You used to have to go through the lines of students protesting to get to class.
Yeah.
And
did they ever take over any buildings there? Or?
Well, it got pretty heated, and my wife and I talked our neighbor out of taking a gun on the campus. He was in sociology, and a lot of his friends had been hurt in an incident near the student union, and they did such things as gluing down all the rocks around the trees there so that they couldn't be thrown at windows. They put like epoxy down, and then they realized that the trees weren't going to survive. But it was weird. And streaking, the first streaking incident happened on campus,
Lord.
the University of Illinois. Yeah, or he parachuted into the middle of the quad.
And that campus was where?
Urbana-Champaign.
Okay.
Urbana-Champaign, not the Chicago campus.
And that's away. Where's Urbana? Sorry, I'm not.
It's right in the center of the state.
Okay, so it's a ways from Chicago.
Right in the center of the state. It's 2 hours, 3 hours by train, I guess it was. Yeah. So, but that Midwest experience was 13 years total, and very fond of Chicago as a city, even though they're having lots of issues again now. But it's almost like repeated history, all this stuff, It's really weird, but I guess that's what happens when you're 50 years of adult life,
Well, it's poverty, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't solved any of those issues since. Here it was all, Martin Luther King and all that stuff, and nothing really happened. It just kind of got buried,
Yeah. This country has a complex history with race, but we won't get into that today.
No, not any more than we already have.
But I think it's interesting. I mean, that I feel like it's colored most people don't talk about it that much, but you are very sensitive to those issues. You feel it going on around you. And
well, when I was managing the Scandinavian store, the school board or the school, I don't know, principal or something. I don't remember how the contact happened, but they approached us about taking on student interns. And so we agreed to do that. And the student they sent to us was a black woman. She was wonderful. She was great. She was, I loved having her there. She was very dependable, all of those things. And the school, after they got her placed, they went away. They didn't want any reports from us.
No.
They didn't follow up on anything. And it was so disturbing because here they had, forced us to do this, kind of. I mean, we didn't have any interns before that, and I don't know if they did afterwards either, but it was just kind of weird, but you saw this, never the twain shall meet, these two, they were thinking they were doing the right thing, but they weren't following through, so they weren't really doing the right thing. They were just sloughing off their responsibility on somebody else.
Right.
Yeah.
But she did okay.
Yeah, she was fine. She was great. So I was happy to have her. But yeah.
Interesting. What else?
Well,
we're getting down to our.
Yeah, I wasn't in any fraternities or sororities, which we were on the list here of things to talk about. I saw some stuff by the fraternities, during pledging and that sort of stuff that didn't appeal to me at all. But, that's just because I was who I was at the time. I was pretty sheltered and inexperienced when I got to campus. And maybe that's what saved my life eventually, I don't know.
Do you remember Mark Ellingson, the president?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
I've heard stories. People say that he knew students' names. I mean, now you don't.
Maybe so. I mean, I didn't feel that connected. Well, I just didn't have. I didn't have the confidence. I didn't have any self-confidence when I got here, and it's only grown over the years. It started here somewhat. One of the things that gave me confidence, and one person that I fondly remember, is Professor Norman Coombs, who was blind, and I believe I had to complete his course first before I could work for him, but I ended up reading for him, and that was really a wonderful experience, and it gave me confidence that it was outside my envelope of experience. I'd never done anything like that. I didn't even feel like I could do it when I did it, but I somehow managed to get that job, so we would get together, I don't know, once or twice a week, and I would read papers, and that would get us into some very interesting conversations.
Sure.
Yeah, I should have kept track of him. I guess
I don't know if I've even
he
heard
recently, I think he recently passed, but just recently. He was emeritus, and I saw something written up about him when I tried to look him up after RIT sort of came back into my
not a name
focus, Something else that's interesting, so I got my son through RPI as a mechanical engineer because of my work there. I got free tuition for him. They've taken some of that away now, that benefit. But I was able to do that. And I was also able to go back to school there and get a master's in building conservation, which I did in part so that I would have a master's and might be able to teach something one day. But because of financial situation and because of the current president's trying to reduce risk and they laid off a whole bunch of us, and I got laid off.
Huh?
Among 96 people a week before Christmas in 2008.
It's nice.
Well, 2007 actually.
So 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's yeah, but that's another dark spot in my memory. That was a terrible day because half of my department was out the door, and most of us had worked together for at least 10 years,
Right.
maybe longer.
No, that
So it was a terrible time. But anyway, I got my son's education there in mechanical engineering. And he's now a design engineer with a medium-sized firm in Syracuse. And they do research with our IT now.
Oh, really?
And they sponsor some research and have had some research done here. And he's a liaison for his company with our IT.
With the industrial design program?
No,
Or
mechanical engineering.
Mechanical engineering. Oh,
And at least I think they may be, because things are integrated here with other programs, it may be, the company he works for makes telecommunications connection devices. And he has several patents to his name
great.
through that firm. But he thinks highly of our IT. They have had kids from here who are co-op students, and they've hired them after that to work for them. He's also a liaison with Cornell and Syracuse, and he said of those three, he would go to our IT in a minute.
Nice. Well, I
He's
think the
been really
students
impressed.
here, they work hard. You know, they do a lot of practical applications in class, and they go
I think
out
that's
sort
important.
of ready to do something. You know,
Right.
it's not all theory.
Right.
Very
See, that's what I
practical.
remember about our IT. I mean, I don't know why I would have been so interested in this kind of thinking about the place, but the way it was managed and the kind of programs they had, and actually their history, the way they were founded, it was this practical, and also it was also in keeping with societal needs.
Yeah. No, they keep an eye on it. Yeah.
So different programs came and went, I suppose, as those things were ebbing and waning and so forth. But I've noticed that about RIT. And RIT and RPI are thought to be in competition in many ways. And I mean, from this tour and knowing the campus at RPI, I mean, their reputation may still be okay at RPI, but because they've focused so much on research in recent years, the undergraduate programs have fallen away, I think, in prestige at least, and it's really too bad. And so to compare them, I mean, I would, yeah, my allegiance would be more with RIT than RPI.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah, I mean, too bad I don't have a lot of money. I would.
You can talk it up.
Yeah. Well, that's what I would do. And actually, I know two people. I recently, 7 years or maybe even 10 years ago, I started working in community theater doing sets,
Oh, great.
designing sets,
Yeah.
which
Well,
I
that
found a
makes
very
sense.
interesting connection with architecture. And so it that brought me in, I have some friends now in the theater community, and two of those people that I've worked with in various ways have kids here now. I think they're both sophomores.
Oh, great.
I don't know I haven't heard about the second person, I guess I'd say, but the first person was the kid that was in his bathrobe on a skateboard and apparently made local news because of it.
Oh gosh, I missed that somehow.
Yeah, I don't know. So that's what she told me. If you see this kid with long hair, wearing a purple bathrobe and riding a skateboard or riding a scooter, I think it was, that's my son. So I guess, and she said he's loving it. So
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear.
I don't
Purple
know
bathrobe or
I don't
not.
know what program he's in.
Yeah.
Oh, I think he was going to be in physics.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we're going to have to.
Okay. Well,
Well, this was very interesting. I love hearing these stories.
It's been an interesting life, and I'm really glad to have gotten reconnected.
Yeah.
Because I don't. There's nobody here other than my friend Gordon that I have stayed in touch with since college. Nobody else, I just sort of once in a while.
Right.
But I have run into several people who are graduates of RIT in my life.
Elsewhere, right.
Various other experiences. So, yeah. Well, I hope that's informative.
I think it was very informative, and thank you very much. I'm gonna